The United States covers about 3.8 million square miles. It is crossed by interstates, mapped by satellites, and watched by more cameras than any country in history. And people still vanish from it without a trace. Not only in the wilderness, from a hotel elevator in downtown Los Angeles, from a moving freighter on the Great Lakes behind a cabin door locked from the inside, from a tidy house in Missouri with the car still in the driveway and the dog still inside. Some of these places are famous. Most are not. All of them left a question no one has answered. Stick with us to the end, because number 1 is a mountain trail in Vermont where a teenager in a bright red coat walked around a bend and was never seen again. And the failure to find her built an entire state police force. This is the kind of story we tell here every week, quiet and well documented and genuinely strange. If you have not subscribed yet, now is a good time. Today we are counting down 15 US disappearance locations that still raise questions today. Number 15, Mount Shasta, the mountain with a city inside it. In Northern California, there is a 14,179-foot volcano that a surprising number of people believe is hollow. Not metaphorically. They believe an advanced civilization lives inside it. The story goes that survivors of a sunken Pacific continent called Lemuria built a 5-level crystal city beneath the peak, and that 7-foot beings still move in and out of it. It sounds ancient. It is not. The word Lemuria came from a zoologist in 1864 trying to explain lemur fossils. A 1905 novel moved the survivors to Shasta. A Rosicrucian writer cemented it in the 1930s. The disappearances that supposedly prove all this tend to dissolve when you look at them. The most famous, a man who vanished in 1934 on the eve of an expedition to find the city, looks a lot like a hoax. Here is the detail that stops people cold. About a decade ago, someone secretly hand-dug a 60-foot hole into the side of the mountain at night with a makeshift pulley, leaving only a ladder, some buckets, and a water bottle. No one knows who or why. The mountain is real, dangerous, and genuinely sacred to the Klamath people. The city is a story we told ourselves. It is just stubborn enough to keep someone digging. Number 14. The Bridgewater Triangle, the swamp where the spirits dwell. About 30 miles south of Boston, there is a 200-square-mile patch of Massachusetts that a cryptozoologist named Loren Coleman drew a triangle around in the 1970s. Boston Magazine ran with it in 1980. The name stuck. At its center is the Hockomock Swamp, more than 5,000 acres, the largest in New England. The Wampanoag name for it translates roughly to the place where spirits dwell. Into that triangle, people have poured almost every legend America has. UFOs, giant birds, Bigfoot, glowing orbs over the water. In 1970, state and local police ran canine units through the swamp after a reported creature and came back with neither a man nor a bear. The honest part is that there is no real catalog of missing people here. The vanishings are folklore, not case files. What is genuine is older and sadder. The swamp was a battlefield in King Philip's War in 1675, one of the deadliest conflicts per capita in American history. And Wampanoag tradition long described small trickster creatures, the Pookwudgies, said to lure people off the path. This is less a place where people vanish than a place where a region buried everything it could not explain, and then kept adding to it. Number 13. The Lake Michigan Triangle, the captain who locked his door. On April 28, 1937, the freighter O.S. McFarland was crossing Lake Michigan toward Port Washington, Wisconsin. The captain, George Donner, had spent hours guiding the ship through ice. He went to his cabin to rest and told the crew to wake him near port. A few hours later, a crewman knocked. Nothing. He forced the door, which was locked from the inside. The cabin was empty. They searched the whole ship. Donner was reportedly too large to fit through either porthole, and there was no other way out. The crew had heard him moving inside before the silence. He was never found. That is the case that gave this water its reputation. The other one is bigger. On a night in June 1950, Northwest Airlines Flight 2501, a DC-4 with 58 people aboard, flew into a violent storm over the lake and vanished. At the time, it was the deadliest commercial air disaster in the country. Searchers recovered about 7,000 pounds of floating debris and human remains. They never found the main wreck. Not one intact body came back. A research team later spent 20 years and roughly $500,000 covering about 700 square miles of lakebed. In June 2025, on the 75th anniversary, they called it off. The historian who led that hunt has a flat answer about the triangle. It is a large, dangerous lake, and storms sink things. That is the boring truth. It still does not explain a man gone from a locked room on a moving ship. Number 12. The Alaska Triangle. Where the majority leader vanished. Draw a line between Anchorage, Juneau, and the far northern town of Utqiagvik, and you have enclosed a piece of country bigger than most nations. Glaciers, boreal forest, crevasses, mountains with no roads. It is one of the few places left in America that can swallow something whole. On October 16, 1972, it swallowed a sitting member of Congress. A twin-engine Cessna 310 left Anchorage for Juneau carrying U.S. House Majority Leader Hale Boggs, Alaska Representative Nick Begich, an aide, and a pilot. It never arrived. The search covered about 32,000 square miles with dozens of military and civilian aircraft. They found nothing. No wreckage, no bodies, no trace. Boggs had served on the Warren Commission, which guaranteed the theories would never stop. You will see a figure attached to this region a lot, 16,000, sometimes 20,000, vanished since the late 1980s. That number deserves scrutiny. It is essentially the entire state's missing persons tally stretched over decades, not a count of unexplained vanishings inside a triangle. The honest explanation is the land itself. A downed plane or a lost hiker is covered by snowfall within hours and simply absorbed. Sometimes the country gives an answer back. Late. A hunter who disappeared in the mid-1970s was finally identified in 2022 from a skull found in 1997. The likely cause was a bear. But the majority leader's plane is still out there, somewhere under the snow, and no one has ever seen it again. Number 11. The Cecil Hotel. The girl in the water tank. The last clear footage of Elisa Lam is about 4 minutes long, shot inside an elevator at a 1924 hotel on the edge of Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles. In it, the 21-year-old Canadian student presses every button, steps in and out, and peers around the doorway as if she is watching for someone who is not there. The elevator does not move. Then she is gone from frame. She was last seen alive on January 31st, 2013. For nearly 3 weeks, no one knew where she was. What ended the search was a complaint. Guests said the water pressure was low and the water tasted wrong. On February 19th, a maintenance worker climbed to the roof and opened one of the building's water tanks. Elisa Lam was inside. The part people fixate on is worth handling carefully. For days, guests had been drinking and showering in that water. The image was grim enough that the internet turned a dead young woman into a meme, which is exactly what a later documentary criticized. Her death was officially ruled an accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder named as a significant factor. The reconstruction is that during an episode she reached the roof and entered the tank. That ruling is on the record. The questions that linger are practical ones. How she reached a restricted roof. How she opened a heavy lid. Why the footage looks the way it does. She was a person long before she was a mystery. The internet keeps forgetting that. The hotel still stands, and the question's never quite closed. Number 10. The Ugly Tuna Saloon. He walked in and never walked out. A man walks into a bar. The cameras see him go in. The cameras never see him come out. That is the entire case, and 20 years of investigation has not cracked it. On the night of March 31st, 2006, Brian Schaffer, a 27-year-old medical student at Ohio State, went bar hopping with a friend after spring finals. Around 1:15 in the morning on April 1st, security footage caught him riding an escalator up to the entrance of the Ugly Tuna Saloon, a second-floor bar in a brand-new campus complex. At about 1:55, he is on camera just outside, talking to 2 women, saying goodnight, then stepping back toward the entrance. That is the last frame of Brian Schaffer that exists. He never came out the monitored main doors. His friends could not find him at closing. He missed a flight to Miami with his girlfriend. His phone, his bank accounts, his cards, all went silent and stayed silent. His apartment was untouched. You will hear that the bar had only one exit. That is a myth. There were others, including a camera-monitored emergency door and a service exit into a construction site, so he could have slipped past a panning camera. He could have left another way. The lead detective believes he simply walked out unseen. The reward climbed to about $100,000. None of it produced him. The complex is still there. The bar is gone. And a building full of cameras in a place that installed them precisely because of crime recorded a man arriving and somehow never recorded him leaving. Number 9. A ditch in western Minnesota. 2 words, then silence. He was on the phone with his father when it happened. Shortly after midnight on May 14, 2008, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson slid his car into a roadside ditch driving home from end-of-semester celebrations. He was not hurt. The car was not badly damaged. He called his parents to come get him and told them he was near the town of Lind. They drove out. They could not find him. So Brandon stayed on the phone and started walking toward distant lights he was sure marked the town. He was wrong about where he was. Cell records later put him near Porter, about 25 miles from where he thought he stood. He had crossed into flat, dark farmland with no landmarks, and in the dark, his mind had mapped a distant glow onto a town he knew. For 47 minutes, his father drove the back roads, talking to him, trying to find him. Then Brandon said 2 words, "Oh shit," and the line went quiet. Callbacks failed. The undamaged car was found that afternoon near the county line. A K-9 team tracked his scent about 3 miles to the Yellow Medicine River, running high and fast that spring, and there the trail ended. No one has found him since. His disappearance led Minnesota to pass Brandon's Law, changing how police respond when an adult goes missing. A father spent 3/4 of an hour driving toward the sound of his son's voice. The last thing he ever heard from it was the dark interrupting mid-sentence. Number 8. 1717. East Delmar Street, gone before the coffee cooled. The house looked fine. That was the problem. When friends let themselves in on the morning of June 7, 1992, the small home in Springfield, Missouri, was calm and tidy. 3 purses sat where they had been left. The cars were in the driveway. Money was untouched. Cigarettes were still out. The family dog was inside. A bed looked slept in. 3 women were simply not there. Cheryl Levitt, 47. Her daughter, Susie Streeter, 19. And Susie's friend, Stacy McCall, 18. Streeter and McCall had graduated high school the day before and gone back to Levitt's house after a couple of parties. Levitt had last spoken to a friend on the phone around 11:15 the night before, talking about repainting a piece of furniture. By morning, all 3 were gone, and nothing was missing but them. There was no forced entry, no sign of a struggle. The one off-note anyone reported was a broken porch light globe. To remove 3 grown adults from a house overnight in a normal neighborhood, leaving the cars, the money, and the dog, and to leave no scene at all is genuinely hard to do. Whoever did it did exactly that. More than 30 years later, the case is still open. Their faces faded in a few storefront windows around town. A tidy house is supposed to mean nothing happened here. This is the one place where the tidiness is the most frightening thing in the room. If you are still with us, this is where the list turns. Everything from here down is documented, recent enough to hurt and harder to shake. If one of these has surprised you, drop a like and tell us in the comments which case you would not have believed if it were fiction. We read them, and they point us toward the next video. Number 7. Lake Lanier, the town at the bottom of the lake. On a summer afternoon, Lake Lanier is a postcard. 45 minutes north of Atlanta, it draws around 12 million visitors a year to its boats and its shoreline. What most of them never think about is what they are floating on top of. There is a town down there. Its streets, walls, and foundations are still standing in the dark water because no one ever tore it down. The town was Oscarville, a black farming community of carpenters, blacksmiths, and successful farmers. In 1912, after a white teenager named May Crow was found dead nearby, a wave of racial violence and expulsion drove the black residents of Forsyth County out. Over the following decades, the government bought up the emptied land. In the 1950s, the Army Corps of Engineers built Buford Dam on the Chattahoochee. The lake filled and reached full pool in 1958. More than 1,000 residents and 250-plus families had been displaced, and cemeteries and roads were moved. Then comes the decision that mattered. The engineers believed flooding the area would cause no problems, so much of Oscarville was not demolished. It was simply submerged, intact. Divers describe finding whole streets and houses on the bottom, and when droughts drop the water, old roadbeds and relics rise back into daylight. That decision had a body count. Submerged trees, foundations, and roads sit close to the surface, and they grab swimmers and hold them. Georgia's own data records 216 deaths. At the lake between 1994 and 2022, 140 of them drownings. People call the lake cursed. Officials point to the hazards underneath. Both descriptions are of the same water. A town built by people who were forced off their land was drowned without ever being buried. And the lake on top of it has never stopped taking people down. Number 6. Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. The crash with no driver. On the night of February 9th, 2004, a black sedan sat crumpled against the snowbank on a dark stretch of wild Ammonoosuc Road in the White Mountains. A local bus driver heading home stopped. A young woman stood by the car. She told him she had already called for help and asked him not to. He drove on and reported it anyway. When police arrived a few minutes later, around 7:46 p.m., the car was there. The woman was not. She has never been seen since. Her name was Maura Murray, a 21-year-old nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and the strange part started before the crash. That afternoon, she had emailed her professors and her work supervisor saying there had been a death in the family and she would be away for a week. Relatives later said no one had died. Then she packed up, bought some alcohol, and drove 2.5 hours north into a part of New Hampshire she had no known reason to visit, without telling anyone where she was going. The crash itself was minor. On that road in that cold, a person who stayed with the car would have been fine. Instead, in the few minutes between a stranger speaking to her and a police cruiser covering a short distance, she stepped off the map. The case went to New Hampshire's Cold Case Unit in 2009. It is still classified as suspicious, the FBI has been involved, and it is unsolved as of this year. Repeated searches over 2 decades have turned up nothing. The road is just a road again. Planned escape, accident, or something done to her. The honest answer is that no one knows, and the family is still waiting on it. Number 5. Spence Field in the Great Smoky Mountains. The prank that never ended. It was supposed to be funny. On June 14, 1969, on a high grassy clearing called Spence Field, a 6-year-old named Dennis Martin, 6 days short of his 7th birthday, and 3 other boys split up to sneak through the brush and surprise the adults who were sitting and talking nearby. The other boys went one way. Dennis went the other. His father was watching the children plan it seconds before. Dennis stepped into the trees on the far side. He did not come out. The family searched immediately, then called it in, and what followed became the largest search in the history of the National Park Service. Roughly 1,400 people combed about 56 square miles of dense Appalachian forest. Thousands of hours and tens of thousands of dollars went into it. A violent storm rolled in, flooding streams and washing out roads, and the early assumption that the boy would turn up within the hour meant the effort was slow to organize. Spence Field sits in a 500,000-acre park along the Appalachian Trail. A 6-year-old does not go far in that terrain. They never found a trace of him. There are details that keep the darker theories alive. Witnesses miles away reported hearing a sickening scream that afternoon and seeing an unkempt man moving through the woods. A shoe print resembling Dennis's was found near a creek but never fully examined. In 2022, after years of requests, the FBI released its 133-page file on the case. It did not answer the question. He would be in his early 60s now. The clearing where he was last seen is still an easy hike on a clear day. You can stand in the exact spot where a family turned around and a child was simply not there anymore. Number 4. A hillside outside Fayetteville, West Virginia. The billboard that watched the highway. For decades, drivers on a West Virginia highway passed a billboard with the faces of 5 children on it, asking what had happened to them. The parents who built it never took it down. The story behind it begins on Christmas Eve, 1945. George and Jenny Soder, Italian immigrants, were home with 9 of their 10 children. Around 1 in the morning, fire broke out. George, Jenny, and 4 of the children got out. The other 5 did not. The house burned to the ground in well under an hour. And when the ashes were searched, the remains of the 5 missing children were not there. That absence is the whole case. The fire was ruled an accidental electrical fault, and death certificates were issued. The Soders never accepted it, because too many small things did not fit. The family said a strange car had been parked nearby, watching the children come home from school. They said a ladder that always sat against the house had vanished that night. They reported a cut phone line and a witness who said she saw the children afterward. Years later, in 1968, Jenny received a photograph in the mail of a young man who resembled a grown version of one of her missing sons. Here is the detail that has never been explained. A private investigator was told the fire chief had found a heart in the ruins and quietly buried it in a box. When it was dug up, a funeral director said it was not a heart at all. It was beef liver and it had not been touched by fire. The children were never found. The case turned 80 years old in 2025. Some parents grieve quietly. The Soders put their grief on a billboard and aimed it at every car that passed for the rest of their lives. Number 3. Plumas National Forest. America's Dyatlov Pass. The car gave nothing away. When searchers found Jack Madruga's 1969 Mercury, days after the men disappeared, it was stuck on a remote mountain road deep in California's Plumas National Forest, far off any route home. It had fuel in the tank. It had no mechanical failure. It was simply abandoned in the snow. The 5 men who had been in it were gone. On February 24, 1978, Madruga and 4 friends, Bill Sterling, Ted Wire, Jack Hewitt, and Gary Mathias, drove home from a college basketball game in Chico. All 5 had mild intellectual disabilities or psychiatric conditions. They were close, careful, and expected home that night for a game of their own the next morning. Instead, they drove up into the snowbound Sierra foothills, on a road they had no reason to take, and left the working car behind. Why is the question no one has answered. A brutal storm shut down the search for months. When the snow melted in June, the bodies began to appear. 3 were found out in the forest. The 4th, Ted Wire, was inside a Forest Service trailer roughly 20 miles from the car. He appeared to have survived for up to 3 months, and he had starved, despite shelves of food and a way to make heat that he never used. Gary Mathias's shoes were in that trailer. His body has never been found. And then there is the object that haunts the whole case. Beside Wire's body lay a gold watch that the family said had never belonged to any of the 5 men. A cold reading explains a lot of it. 5 vulnerable men, lost, panicking, dying of exposure. It does not explain the watch, and it does not explain Mathias. The forest is open again every summer. It is still holding one of them. Number 2. Roanoke Island, North Carolina. The word carved into the post. When the governor finally came back, the colony was gone, and the only message was a single word cut into a wooden post. Croatoan. In 1587, about 115 to 118 English settlers landed on Roanoke Island, on what is now the North Carolina coast. Among them was a child named Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. Their governor, John White, sailed back to England for supplies that same year. He meant to return quickly. He could not. England was at war with Spain, the Armada crisis swallowed the ships, and White was stranded for roughly 3 years. When he reached Roanoke again in August 1590, the settlement was empty. No people, no bodies, no sign of a fight. Just CRO carved into a tree and Croatoan carved into the palisade. The settlers had agreed on a code before he left. If they moved, they would carve their destination. If they moved in distress, they would add a cross. The carving named Croatoan, the home of a friendly indigenous group on what is now Hatteras Island. There was no cross. That points to the most likely answer, and it is not supernatural. The colonists probably left in good order and joined the people of Croatoan. Recent digs on Hatteras, including ironworking debris reported in 2025, keep strengthening that case. But White never got to find out. A storm and an impatient crew kept him from sailing the short distance to Croatoan to look for his own daughter and granddaughter. He sailed for England instead and never saw them again. More than 440 years later, archaeologists are still arguing over where they went. The most American of mysteries is not really that 100 people vanished. It is that a grandfather stood feet from the answer and was turned back by the weather. Number 1. The Bennington Triangle in southwestern Vermont. The girl in the red coat. Start on the trail. The long trail runs north through the Green Mountains, and in late autumn the hardwoods are bare and the light goes early. The ground is soft and quiet under your boots. There is wind in the branches and not much else. You pass a clearing, then another, where the grass is too even and the stone foundations are too square, and you realize a town used to be here. Then the forest closes back in. The path bends, and there is a particular feeling walking this mountain that the woods are paying more attention to you than you are to them. People have walked around bends up here and not come back. The ghost towns are real. Glastonbury and Somerset were logging, and mill settlements that died as the industry left, and Vermont formally unincorporated them in 1937, leaving a near-empty mountain with a long, uneasy reputation. Native tradition is said to have treated the area as cursed. Between 1945 and 1950, at least 5 people disappeared around Glastonbury Mountain. An author named Joseph Citro gave the cluster a name on the radio in 1992, the Bennington Triangle. In November 1945, a 74-year-old hunting guide named Mitty Rivers walked ahead of his party and vanished. The only thing ever found was a single rifle cartridge. A year later, on December 1st, 1946, an 18-year-old Bennington College student named Paula Weldon went for a hike on the long trail in a bright red coat. People saw her on the path. A couple hiking behind her watched her round a bend ahead of them. When they came around it, she was gone. More than 1,000 people searched. There was a $5,000 reward, aircraft, even the FBI. They found nothing at all. Exactly 3 years later, to the day, a man named James Tedford disappeared from a moving bus between stops. His belongings were still in the luggage rack. An open timetable sat on his empty seat. Then, in 1950, an 8-year-old boy named Paul Jepson vanished after being left alone for a few minutes. Bloodhounds tracked him to the same stretch of highway where Weldon had disappeared and then lost him. And here is what that string of failures actually built. The Weldon search was handled so badly, and the public outcry was so loud, that about 7 months later, Vermont created its state police force. A missing teenager in a red coat became the reason an entire institution exists. No one was ever charged. No bodies were recovered. The theories run from a predator to simple winter deaths to something with no name. The trail is still open. You can hike it tomorrow. And somewhere on that quiet mountain, a girl in a red coat went around a bend ahead of 2 witnesses into ordinary daylight and walked straight out of the world. 15 places, 1 country, and the same stubborn fact in each. People slip out of a mapped, watched, modern nation and are never accounted for. For me, the one that lingers is the Lake Michigan captain. A locked cabin on a moving ship and an empty room. I cannot put that one down. Tell us in the comments which case got under your skin or which one we missed. If quiet, careful stories like these are what you came for, subscribe and we will keep finding them.